He called her Mom on the screen. But behind the cameras, their bond was something no Hollywood script could ever capture. When the Partridge Family first aired in 1970, millions of Americans tuned in every week to watch the perfect TV family, a widowed mother and her talented, charming son. Their laughter filled living rooms, their songs echoed through teenage bedrooms, and their smiles lit up America like sunshine through a storm. Shirley Jones and David Cassidy, their chemistry seemed flawless, effortless, and entirely pure. Yet what the audience didn't know was that the warmth they saw on screen wasn't acting. It came from something deeply real and painfully complicated, because Shirley Jones wasn't just David's TV mother, she was his real-life stepmother, the woman who had married his father, the brilliant yet tormented actor Jack Cassidy. In a world driven by applause and illusion, the two found something genuine, a fragile love born not of romance, but of understanding, a love forged in the shadow of one man's brokenness. This is the untold story of David Cassidy and Shirley Jones, the son who sought a mother in the woman who once loved his father, and the woman who tried, in her own quiet way, to save them both. Welcome to the secret file of fame. Before the flashing cameras, before the teenage screams that echoed through arenas, David Cassidy's story began in silence, a silence filled with absence. He was born in 1950 into a family made for the stage. His father, Jack Cassidy, was a Broadway star, charismatic, ambitious, and magnetic. His mother, Evelyn Ward, was a gifted actress who tried to hold their home together as Jack's hunger for fame grew stronger than his love for family. To the world, they looked like the perfect couple. But behind the curtain, cracks began to form. Jack's restlessness and infidelity tore through their marriage like a slow fire. When David was only 3, that fire consumed what little peace remained. I remember waiting by the window for him to come home, David once said quietly, but his father rarely did. After the divorce, his childhood became a series of waiting rooms, waiting for letters, waiting for visits, waiting to be seen. He stayed with his grandparents in New Jersey while his mother worked tirelessly in New York, trying to rebuild a life for them both. Other children played with their fathers on weekends. David watched from the sidelines, learning early what it felt like to be invisible. Then, in 1956, everything changed. His father remarried. Her name was Shirley Jones, radiant, kind, and full of promise. Fresh off her triumphs in Oklahoma and Carousel, she was America's golden girl. Together, Jack and Shirley built what looked like a dream, a glamorous Hollywood marriage and 3 beautiful sons, Sean, Patrick, and Ryan. To the world, it was picture perfect. To David, it was proof that he no longer belonged. He saw their smiling photos in magazines, Shirley's hand resting lovingly on Jack's shoulder, the children laughing under California's sun. They looked so happy, David once recalled. I didn't realize then that she would one day become one of the most important people in my life. But in those early years, the distance between father and son grew wider. When David did visit, Jack's mood swung like a pendulum. Warm one moment, cruel the next. He would praise David's charm, then cut him down with a single sentence. That unpredictability carved scars that never fully healed. David's entire life, his hunger for applause, his need to be loved, was shaped by one unfulfilled wish. That his father might finally look at him and say, "I'm proud of you, son." Long before the Partridge Family made him a star, David Cassidy was already living the story that would define him, a boy chasing affection in a family that performed love on the stage but couldn't hold it together off screen. By the late 1960s, the world around David Cassidy was changing. Rock music was exploding, television was reinventing itself, and Hollywood had begun to crown a new generation of stars. In the midst of all that noise, David was still searching for his place, a young actor trying to escape the shadow of a famous father and build something of his own. He auditioned tirelessly, small TV roles, failed pilots, bit parts, each rejection chipping away at his confidence. Yet he kept going. The charm, the quick smile, the vulnerable eyes, they caught the right person's attention at the right moment. In 1970, everything changed. David Cassidy was cast as Keith Partridge in a new television series called The Partridge Family. It was meant to be a simple, family-friendly sitcom about a widowed mother and her musically gifted children. A light, cheerful show full of songs and laughter. But once it aired, The Partridge Family became a phenomenon. Almost overnight, David went from an unknown actor to the biggest teen idol on the planet. His face was everywhere, from lunchboxes to magazine covers, from record stores to bedroom posters. Tiger Beat, Rolling Stone, his voice filled the radio. His concerts sold out within minutes. Young girls fainted at airports just to catch a glimpse of him. But while the world fell in love with Keith Partridge, the man behind the smile, David Cassidy, began to disappear. His every move was controlled. The studio told him what to wear, what to say, even what to feel. The record label owned his voice, the producers shaped his image, and the press followed his every step. The freedom he had once dreamed of came wrapped in golden chains. He wanted to write his own music, songs with meaning, emotion, truth. But the machine that built him only wanted one thing, the perfect teen idol. Fame brought applause, but also isolation. The louder the cheers became, the deeper his loneliness grew. I was adored by millions, he would later admit, but I felt completely alone. And in the shadows of that loneliness, one relationship quietly anchored him. His connection to Shirley Jones, his stepmother, and TV mom. While his real father, Jack, grew distant and envious of his son's rising stardom, Shirley remained a steady light. On set, she was calm and patient, a maternal presence in the whirlwind. Off set, she was his confidant, the person who saw the boy beneath the fame. By the time The Partridge Family ended in 1974, David was only in his mid-20s, but he had already lived the full arc of a star, from innocence to idolization to exhaustion. He withdrew from the spotlight, yearning for something real, for music that wasn't manufactured, for love that wasn't conditional, for peace that didn't vanish when the applause stopped. And though his fame began to fade, his impact never did. He had become the prototype, the blueprint for every young star who came after him. David Cassidy had conquered the world, but deep inside, he was still that little boy, standing by the window, waiting for someone to come home. When The Partridge Family premiered in 1970, it promised laughter, color, and catchy pop tunes. But hidden beneath the bright costumes and upbeat melodies was a far deeper story, one that blurred the line between fiction and reality. In the show, Shirley Jones played the widowed mother, patient, gentle, and endlessly understanding. David Cassidy played her oldest son, Keith, charming, impulsive, and full of youthful fire. Each week, millions tuned in to watch their playful exchanges and heartfelt duets. What no one realized was that The affection between them wasn't scripted. It was real. Shirley later admitted, "We didn't have to pretend to care for each other, we truly did." On set, she became a guardian as much as a co-star, sensing the weight that fame was beginning to place on David's young shoulders. She had lived through the same Hollywood system, the glamour, the pressure, the endless expectations. But unlike his father, Jack Cassidy, who demanded perfection and saw love as performance, Shirley offered something rare in that world: compassion without condition. For David, the Partridge set became more than a workplace. It became a sanctuary. On screen, he had a mother who listened, who believed in him. Off screen, he found the same: a woman who saw through the glitter and fame straight to the frightened boy beneath. That emotional connection ran deep. Shirley saw in David echoes of his father, the charisma, the brilliance, but also the fragility. Every time she looked at him, she felt the ache of memory, the reminder of Jack's charm and his self-destruction. It made their relationship both tender and tragic. When the cameras stopped rolling, their mother-son bond didn't vanish. They spoke often, confiding in each other long after the show ended. She would later say, "He was like the son I never had." Not because she lacked sons of her own, but because her connection with David came from something deeper, almost spiritual. Together, they carried the same wound. Both had loved the same man, and both had been broken by him in different ways. In the bright, cheerful world of the Partridge Family, every episode ended in a song, a happy resolution to every problem. But in real life, their harmony was fragile, a fleeting melody shaped by shared pain and quiet understanding. Behind the laughter, there was grief. Behind the music, there was truth. And behind the camera, there were two souls, one searching for a mother, the other still mourning the husband she could not save, finding in each other the kind of love Hollywood could never write. When the crowds stopped screaming and the lights dimmed, David Cassidy was left alone with a silence, the kind of silence that forces a man to face the truth of who he really is. For years after the Partridge Family ended, he tried to reinvent himself. He toured, acted, and wrote music. But no matter what he did, the ghost of Keith Partridge followed him. The world wanted the smiling teen idol. The real man behind the image was still invisible. It wasn't until the 1990s that David began to tell his story, first with humor, then with heartbreak. His first memoir, published in 1994, was titled "Come On, Get Happy, Fear and Loathing on the Partridge Family Bus." He was 44 years old, still charming, still self-aware, still able to laugh at the madness of fame. The book was filled with wit and nostalgia. He poked fun at the absurdities of stardom, the screaming fans, the endless touring, the surreal experience of being idolized by millions. But beneath that lighthearted tone was something deeper, a quiet longing for authenticity, for a life that wasn't dictated by image or expectation. He wrote tenderly about Shirley Jones, describing her as the one constant light amid the chaos. "She was wonderful," he wrote. "She gave me warmth when everything around me was cold." That single line revealed more truth than any headline ever could. In Come On, Get Happy, David was still smiling, bruised but not broken. A man trying to make peace with his past, still finding humor in the wreckage. But 13 years later, the smile was gone. In 2007, he released his second memoir, Could It Be Forever? My Story? This time, there was no filter, no irony, only raw honesty. He wrote about addiction, financial struggles, failed relationships, and the lifelong ache of being his father's son. The pages read like a confession, not from a celebrity, but from a man stripped bare by regret. He wrote again about Shirley, but this time the tone had changed. She loved me, he admitted, but she loved Jack more, and I could never compete with that. It wasn't bitterness, it was resignation, the sad acceptance of a truth that had haunted him all his life, where come on, get happy had been a nostalgic farewell to innocence. Could it be forever? Was a descent into truth. He exposed the hollowness behind the fame, the applause that faded too fast, the affection that never felt real. They loved Keith Partridge, he wrote, but I don't know if anyone ever really loved David. By the time he finished the book, it was clear he wasn't writing to entertain anymore. He was writing to survive. His words were raw, stripped of glamour, full of quiet pain. He no longer needed to pretend. The boy who once performed for love was finally admitting how much it had cost him. Shirley Jones later read both memoirs. In interviews, she said she wept after finishing the second one. David's pain, she said, came from wanting to be loved by his father, but instead, he was loved by the world. And perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all, that millions could adore him, but the one man whose approval he craved most never gave it. Between his two books lies the journey of a soul, from illusion to honesty, from performance to confession, from the boy who smiled for the camera to the man who finally dared to tell the truth. When Shirley Jones published her autobiography in 2013, simply titled Shirley Jones, a Memoir, readers expected Hollywood glamour. They anticipated stories of Broadway triumphs, Oscars, and the golden days of Oklahoma and Carousel. But what they found was something far more intimate. It wasn't a celebration of fame, it was a confession of love, pain, and the heavy cost of caring for complicated men. And among the pages, one name appeared again and again, David. Not as a co-star, not as a stepchild, but as a boy she had loved and could never quite save. She recalled their first meeting in the 1950s, when David was still a shy, polite teenager visiting his father, Jack Cassidy. She remembered the careful way he smiled, the guarded eyes of a boy who had already learned how to protect himself from disappointment. Years later, when they stood side by side on the Partridge Family set, that boy had become a man, famous, adored, but still fragile. When I looked at David, she wrote, I saw his father's sparkle and his father's sadness. Her memoir painted Jack as a man of contradictions, brilliant, magnetic, but also reckless and self-destructive. He could light up a room one moment and destroy it the next. Shirley loved him deeply, but she also lived in the shadow of his storms, enduring his jealousy, infidelity, and emotional volatility. And through it all, she watched how those same patterns took root in David. The show that had made them household names, The Partridge Family, became more than just a sitcom. It became, as Shirley described it, the family table we never had. Between takes, David would sit beside her and talk about the exhaustion of touring, the loneliness of fame, the confusion of being adored but unseen. She didn't lecture. She listened. I knew he needed what I tried to give my own sons, safety and love, she wrote. Playing his mother on the screen felt natural because in my heart, he already was one of mine. But her reflections weren't without sorrow. Shirley saw how history repeated itself, how both Jack and David carried the same brilliance and the same self-destructive longing for love. She described the helplessness of standing between them, loving them both, watching both drift away in their own pain. After Jack's death in 1976, Shirley thought perhaps the cycle would end. But David, too, began to spiral. The fame, the alcohol, the inner emptiness that never fully left him. He had everything, she wrote, but he carried a sadness that no success could erase. In her later interviews, her voice would soften whenever his name was mentioned. He was a beautiful boy, she said quietly, and a beautiful man, but he never believed it. I just wish he had found the peace he was always searching for. Through her memoir, Shirley gave the world not gossip, but grace. She showed what Hollywood often hides, that love, even when it fails to save, can still be the most powerful thing a person leaves behind. As the years went by and the glitter of fame began to fade, David Cassidy started to speak more openly about the people who had truly mattered in his life. Among them, one name always carried a quiet reverence: Shirley Jones. By the 1980s and 1990s, the chaos of the Partridge Family was long behind them. The screaming fans were gone, replaced by introspective interviews and reflective songs. Yet every time Shirley's name came up, David's tone would change. The showman's charm fell away, and something softer emerged: gratitude, admiration, and a hint of longing. In one 1990 interview, his voice trembled slightly as he said, "Shirley was the only person in that family who truly saw me." He explained that his father, Jack, had measured him by artistic standards: success, fame, and perfection. But Shirley valued something else entirely: his heart. "She believed in me," he said, "even when I didn't believe in myself." It was a startling admission from a man who had spent his youth being idolized by millions. Out of all the adoration he received, the approval that mattered most came not from the fans, not from critics, not even from his own blood, but from his stepmother. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, David's career took on a quieter rhythm: stage performances, cabaret shows, intimate concerts. And in those years of reinvention, he spoke of Shirley often, calling her his emotional compass. When everything was falling apart, he told a British journalist, I'd hear her voice in my head. Calm, rational, loving, that's how I survived it. They didn't always stay in close contact. Life pulled them in different directions. But every reunion reignited that same unspoken affection. In a 2009 Partridge Family reunion, when they sat side by side for the first time in years, the audience could feel it: the same warmth, the same trust, the same unbreakable connection. David joked about his wild youth, and Shirley smiled, the way only a mother could, proud, amused, and quietly wistful. But as time passed, David's reflections grew more bittersweet. His optimism gave way to introspection. He began to speak not about fame, but about love, regret, and the meaning of family. "She was the mother I wish I'd had growing up," he confessed in one interview. Jack was brilliant, but Shirley was steady. She was real. In 2014, when asked what he would say to her if he could go back to those early days on set, David paused for a long moment. Then, with a trembling smile, he whispered, "I'd tell her, thank you for loving me when I didn't deserve it." By then, David's health was declining. Alcohol had left its mark. His memory was beginning to fade. Yet through it all, he still remembered her. In a 2016 radio interview, he said, "No matter what people think of me, good or bad, Shirley knows who I really am." And that's enough. When David Cassidy passed away in November 2017, Shirley's statement was brief, but deeply heartfelt. David was the light in so many people's lives, she said softly. I will always love him. To those who knew their history, those few words carried a lifetime of truth. They weren't the words of a co-star bidding farewell. They were the farewell of a mother who had lost another son. Even now, when asked about David, Shirley speaks with that same warmth, equal parts pride and sorrow. He had a beautiful soul, she said. He just carried too much pain. Their story wasn't loud or scandalous. It was quiet, steady, and heartbreakingly human. A love that asked for nothing, gave everything, and endured beyond the grave. In Hollywood, where stories fade as quickly as the applause, few connections endure the passage of time. But the bond between David Cassidy and Shirley Jones, born on a television set and tested by decades of love, loss, and regret, has outlived both fame and illusion. When the lights dim and the cameras stop, what remains are not the trophies or the magazine covers, but the people who truly mattered. For David, that person was Shirley. For Shirley, it was David. Their relationship defied labels, not romantic, not bound by blood, yet deeper than both. It was a family born of empathy, forged in the quiet spaces between performance and reality. David's life was a collision of extremes, from teenage superstardom to public struggle, from applause to addiction. Yet through every rise and fall, the thread that anchored his story was the woman who believed in him when the world only wanted his image. Even near the end, when memory began to slip and his fame had long faded, Shirley's presence remained in his words. "She knows who I am," he said. "That's enough." And for Shirley, now in her later years, that truth became both comfort and sorrow. She lived long enough to see David's name etched into pop culture history, the face of a generation, the sound of youth. But to her, he was never an icon. He was still the boy who sought her warmth between takes, who looked to her for the kind of love he had spent his whole life chasing. She once said, he had everything, but peace always stayed just out of reach. Her voice trembled as she added, "I only hope he knows now how deeply he was loved." Their story challenges Hollywood's definition of family. It wasn't about perfect images or happy endings. It was about two wounded souls, one who lost a father, one who lost a husband, choosing to see each other with compassion instead of resentment. Shirley had stepped into David's fractured world and offered the gentleness he had been denied since childhood. And in return, David gave her something precious, a reflection of the man she once loved, but without the darkness that had destroyed him. Even today, fans post old photos of the two, laughing on set, guitars in hand, sharing smiles that were real long before the director called action. New generations who discover the Partridge Family sense something genuine in those performances, something deeper than the scripted affection. That authenticity, that truth, is their legacy. They healed each other, even if they never said it aloud. She reminded him that love could be gentle. He reminded her that love could survive tragedy. In a world built on illusion, their connection was disarmingly real. It wasn't a Hollywood fairy tale. It was something far rarer, a love story without romance, a family without blood, a bond that outlived fame, addiction, and even death. Because sometimes the truest families are not the ones we're born into, but the ones who stay long after the spotlight fades. He called her Mom on screen. Off screen, she became his heart. In the end, David Cassidy spent his life chasing light. The spotlight the applause, the father's love he never found, and the Shirley Jones, graceful and grounded, became that light's reflection, the calm after his storm. She didn't save him from fame, she simply stood beside him through it. Long after the music faded, what remained was the echo of something true. The look in their eyes when the cameras stopped rolling, the warmth no studio could manufacture. It was fragile, it was imperfect, and it was real. Because sometimes the most honest stories in Hollywood aren't written by screenwriters, they're lived by the broken. And so, as the final notes fade and the curtain falls, we are left not with the glitter of fame, but with something far more fragile: truth. David Cassidy and Shirley Jones never intended to become symbols of love and redemption. Yet through their connection, they revealed something the world often forgets: that even in Hollywood, a place built on illusion, genuine human connection can still exist. Theirs was not a story of perfect endings. It was a story of recognition, of two people who saw each other completely when no one else did. David, forever searching for a mother's love; Shirley, forever haunted by the ghosts of the men she loved and lost. Together, they created something the cameras could not capture: healing. And though David's journey ended too soon, his spirit remains in the music, in the laughter, and in that soft, unspoken bond that transcended fame. When Shirley looks back now, she doesn't see a co-star. She sees a son. He called her mom on screen, but in the quiet between takes, he called her home. Because in the end, love, real love, doesn't need a script. It survives the spotlight, it outlives the applause, and it remains long after the world forgets your name. This was the secret file of fame, where the spotlight fades and the truth begins.